Hi everyone, I'm Miss Crowell, and I'm here for another lecture from our Ancient Africa unit. So let's go ahead and get started. This lecture is going to be kind of a continuation of the last lecture, and I'm going to kind of dig in on one of the societies that may have come out of the Bantu migrations, a people who are named the Nok. Now, they're not their real name, their true name, what they called themselves, is unknown to us. As a matter of fact, a lot of things about their culture are unknown to us, and I'll explain the circumstances surrounding why we know so little about these people with having a wealth of archaeological evidence. Um, so the Nok are named after the place where they were discovered, which was a town called Nok in Nigeria. So we're going to talk a little bit about them, some of the features of that society, and some of the reasons why this ancient group of people was so culturally significant for the whole ancient world. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to take you over to my PowerPoint. All right, the Nok. Now, as I said, the Nok are a group of people who originate, well, this says 550 BCE. I put an incorrect date, so you're going to have to correct that in your notes. 900 BCE to about 200 CE, 900 or 1000 BCE. They are located east of the Niger River, north of the Benue River, and named after the town where those artifacts were discovered, as I said. Some of the most important features of this society, some of the earliest examples of iron smelting in sub-Saharan Africa, and some of the earliest examples of sophisticated sculpture in sub-Saharan Africa, and one of the earliest large-scale sculpture maker cultures in the world. So they're making, I'll get into it, I'm getting excited. So iron smelting, what does that mean? Well, to smelt iron, to forge iron is one thing. You can take crude iron and forge it into whatever it is you need from it. However, iron smelting will heat the iron in forges that have to be built in a certain way in order to extract the iron in its pure form. So this culture, the Nok people, they were able to master that craft. They were able to master the craft of smelting iron, which led to them having more sophisticated tools for agriculture. They were a sedentary, agriculture-based society. They're in the path of the Bantu migrations, and as we know, the Bantu people are they have a number of features that line up perfectly with the Nok: a belief in animism, iron smelting, agriculture-based societies, and then finally, the Nok have a unique feature. They are making terracotta sculptures of figures and faces and animals, and they are some of the most sophisticated sculptures in the ancient world. So, as I said, they are in the path of the Bantu migrations and share a lot of those same features. You can see Nigeria falling in the sort of like that yellow line that draws through Central Africa, and the orange lines that crisscross the continent. You can see that they're in the path of those migration routes in Nigeria. So it's not entirely certain that they're descended from the Bantu migrations, but it's very possible. And unfortunately, we can't know a lot of things about the Nok concretely. And there are reasons for that. And as was true with our knowledge of the Bantu migrations, colonialism on the continent of Africa, which was, again, the process by which in the late 1800s, Europe had a meeting called the Berlin Conference, and they divided up Africa like a piece of a pie. The people in the countries that they defined already had cultural identities and already had groups established. Europeans paid no attention to those groups and simply drew the lines wherever they felt like they wanted the territory to fall. So, and then after that, they continued their process of oppressing, enslaving, and what's the word I'm looking for? Basically, like trying to siphon all of the resources, natural resources, away from the continent, because the continent is rich in natural resources, iron, oil, these kinds of things. And they're exploited continually for hundreds and hundreds of years. And some places are still suffering because of that exploitation. What also suffers because of the exploitation and oppression and the mess of colonialism is history. So the Nok are an important people, a people who left behind a wealth of archaeological evidence. But because of the way that was handled in colonial Africa, and because of the way African histories were treated throughout most of the 20th century, we lost a lot of evidence of this culture. And unfortunately, because of that loss, scholars today are having a really hard time and may never be able to determine the concrete things about the Nok. Are they related to the Bantu culture? What was the function of their terracotta sculptures? So let's continue. This is a video that I am going to show you for a minute about iron forging. And you can see this is a modern forge, but it's a kind of a version of what an ancient, I just wanted to give you kind of a picture of what a physical iron forge would look like in Africa. And people throughout Africa still smelt iron today. It's a perfected craft over thousands of years. That's very important. These kinds of iron forges were emerging in Africa earlier than anywhere else in the world. These are the kind of tools that the Nok were making. And this made them very powerful in the region, and it probably was a very sought after skill set that these people were able to perfect. So having these sophisticated iron tools, just to give you a little bit of a glimpse, they truly, oh, whoops, they truly dominated the region. They must have dominated the region because of those tools, because of those abilities. Unfortunately, as I said, because of the treatment of the site and the archaeological evidence, material culture, not much can be determined about whether or not that's true. But we can infer, meaning that we can take the evidence around us and make educated guesses. But we have to also understand that those are merely guesses. So the terracotta heads. These are just a couple of examples of the kind of sculpture that you would see. They range from being, they can fit in the palm of your hand to being actually fully life-size, which is really huge development that is only occurring in a couple other places throughout the ancient world. So they are the first African culture, and maybe probably one of the first cultures to start making large scale sculptures. And they made them out of clay, fired clay, terracotta. So there are a lot of these sculptures. There was a wealth of them at the site. And unfortunately, at the initial discovery of the site by a British archaeologist, there was a lot of mishandling of these artifacts. And many of them were thought to be either discarded, stolen, or simply destroyed, which is a tremendous shame because these are works of great significance in terms of art history and in human history in general. And eventually, the vulnerabilities left behind by how the archaeological excavation was handled led to a lot of looting occurring in the 60s and 70s. And this resulted in a lot of these sculptures and imitations of these sculptures on the black market. We'll come back to the black market in a second. So as far as how these statues and heads and animal figures, all kinds of subject matter for these sculptures, and they probably represented a myriad of things. So the sculptures are widely varied. We have animal figures, which we think might relate to their beliefs in animism, have some kind of totem spiritual essence to them. There are also figures that show evidence, human figures, human-like figures, who show evidence of jungle diseases and deformities that would result from jungle diseases. This culture was situated in the proximity of forests and rainforests, so they probably would have encountered unfortunately, a lot of jungle diseases, some of which I saw the results of when I lived in Africa, and they can really, really deform and be horrific to go through. And some of these sculptures reflect those ailments, those deformities. So scholars today, although we can't know because of the way the site was handled, scholars today believe that there is a chance that they were using these figures for healing, to try and reverse the effects of these jungle diseases. Some of them are thought to represent ancestors or deities. Some of these figures were set above the doorway of some huts or structures to indicate that there is a shrine contained within that house. And then also, as we see from ancient sculpture a lot, probably some were used as grave markers. So this craft was used widely in this culture for hundreds of years. And as a result, there were and are still many, 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 many of these figures out in the world. Some of them are in their rightful place in museums in Nigeria. Some are in museums in England, and many have been lost to the black market and just the mishandling of artifacts that was sort of the result of the excavation process. We're going to talk for a moment about cultural property. So the discovery of these artifacts, like I said, wasn't handled very well. We've talked a lot about archaeology this year because, as we know, we're dealing with the ancient world. Archaeology is one of the three types of evidence that we can have, and it's invaluable. If we can access the material culture of a society, so much can be revealed to us. Having archaeological evidence for a scholar or historian is a gift. and it's not always given, especially when we're dealing with African history. The reason for that is the way that archaeology, the way that historical evidence and material culture was treated in colonial Africa. So it was seen more as a commodity and less of a scholarly important thing to do to excavate these places. And some of the sculptures, like I said, did make their way into the places where they should be, like museums in Nigeria. But I've shown you here the liste rouge, the red list, is a international document that's released to identify the types of historical material culture that is on the black market and that people should look out for, report if they find, and return if they happen to have bought. So here we can see this terracotta head is merely an example, not a wanted poster, but an example of what they are showing, that the Nok terracottas are vulnerable to being exploited and looted and sold on the black market. And they have been for years, since the 60s and 70s, after the 1950s, when these artifacts were discovered. So unfortunately, because of the way African history was treated by colonial powers, we have lost a lot of that history. We've lost a lot of evidence. We've lost a lot of context. And it's really unfortunate because that's people's cultural heritage. That's the story of that place. And we have to regard all stories of all places, no matter where they are, as important to the greater picture of what it means to be a person on this earth. So it's really sad to see in Africa these sites mistreated, and how much looting and exploitation results from that mistreatment. So I encourage you to think about history and how corrupted it can become, and how clever we have to be able to get around things like looting, the black market. You know, like, these evils exist in the world. We know evils exist in the world. We have to be clever enough to get around them. So that's just a little glimpse into the Nok culture and the implications of the existence of these figures on the black market in the modern historical context. But before we end, I want to take us back to these beautiful sculptures, because let's think about the people who made them with their hands and sculpted them perfectly and polished them and designed these elaborate hairstyles, used these distinctive features because they had a style. The Nok had a style. You can see it throughout these figures. And being brave and artistically inclined and creative enough to decide, I want to make a figure that's as big as I am. That's huge. That's an unbelievable development in human artistic ability. I find the Nok to be really, really interesting. And I think that if we had more information about them, we'd realize that they are even more significant than we already think they are. So that is what I have to say to you about the Nok. Really interesting to me. And for your assignment, I'd rather not give you a quiz. So keep a lookout for what my assignment will be for the Nok video. Okay? All right, you guys. Have a great day. It's been a pleasure.